Liftoff will start in T-minus 10 seconds.
Hey everybody, this is Evan and John, and you're listening to The Boomer and X Show.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Boomer and X Show. Thank you for joining us yet again. My name is John. This is my good buddy Evan. Hey, Evan.
What's going on?
How you doing?
Doing good.
We are in the week. We're in the first full week of May, and it is we're in the week after Super Saturday, and we were on here covering a whole lot of sports stuff on Saturday.
Oh yeah, we knocked it out. We actually burned the midnight oil like we promised, and we got that thing out Sunday morning.
I was dang near burning the sunrise oil, editing all of that. So, yeah, we got it out, and we certainly had a good response to that, so that's very encouraging. But now we actually have some results of some things that were going on. Let's touch on the fight real quick. There's a little bit of controversy in that seems like Pacquiao had a shoulder injury that he's about to have surgery on that he didn't reveal before the fight.
I guess, I don't know, is there anything against that?
Well, they do a pre-fight thing where you're supposed to honestly reveal any issues that you may have, and he checked no, or his team or his trainer checked no to the question, do you have a shoulder injury? Now, they got an okay to get an anti-inflammatory injection,
Pre-fight,
yeah. Maybe something will come out, but I don't know. I mean, he's not going to return his purse. People aren't going to get their money back.
No. I mean, it's like kind of lying on your resume, or not your resume, but a job application. And they're like, have you ever had a head injury or something? And you're like, well, if I say no, they're not going to hire me, so no. That dude got, what, $100 million?
Yeah. So
yeah, I do a little bit of
the thing
fibbing.
about it is I don't have to think that any disciplinary action...
It'll just be a fine, if anything, I guess.
Well, I guess so. And I would say his career is probably pretty close to being over anyway.
He still has some fights on his contract, but yeah, he's close.
So, I don't know. It just kind of seems like, to me, it's probably a bunch of chatter that's not going to lead anywhere. Well, that's my guess.
Let me say this. Your prediction was right. Mine was wrong. I went with the little guy, and I thought Pacquiao was going to just push him the whole fight, just stay in his face and make him have to put out. And what really happened was the opposite, where he kind of just kept getting punched. Little jabs is what got him. So. And I didn't watch the fight.
I didn't watch it either. It's been several years since I actually watched a
You can tell we're not crazy
prize fight. Well, I used to be. I mean, I used to be a big
but used to. It wasn't $100 to watch it on TV.
No, it was a long time ago.
Yeah.
In fact, I'll tell you what, I'm glad you brought that up, because the pay-per-view thing started a long time. What they used to do way back in the 70s, with big fights like this, they would do what was called a closed-circuit TV. And people would go to like a convention center or a place, and they would pay to get in. And this was before sports bars were all over the place and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. In fact, I think my dad, who was a big boxing fan, and actually in his youth was a boxer himself.
Oh, cool.
He went to a couple. I never went. But then they come to the pay-per-view, deliver it to your house, obviously as technology advances. And I always resisted the buy $30, $40 to watch something on my TV set. But I finally relented, and I paid for one and only. And the one that I paid for was the Holyfield-Tyson bite fight, where he bit his damn ear off. That was
live?
I saw it live.
Wow.
And you saw a crazy reaction out of Holyfield, but if I remember correctly, and this is about 20 years ago, the referee didn't really do anything.
I think he bit him twice.
And then he went in and again. Yeah, and I mean, it was just insane. And then so the fight's over. If I remember correctly, Tyson was disqualified.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I'm never paying for this crap again, and I haven't. But I'll always remember the one time I finally said, okay, you know what, I'm interested enough, chip in some money with a few people and we'll watch it, and that crap happened. So,
well, let's get to something you did watch.
The Derby.
Yeah.
The Derby. Big horse racing fan. I had studied the past performances of these horses going in. Without getting into it too deeply, there were a few things I really liked about American Pharaoh, and he ended up winning. Actually, during the course of the race, I think the pace of the race, and there's an old adage in racing that pace makes the race. If you go out and burn yourself out, you're going to falter. Or if you're a front runner and you're allowed to get an easy lead at a leisurely pace and nobody pushes you, then you could go wire to wire. The pace really wasn't to his liking. It was actually a little slow. The pace was to the liking of whoever was actually out on front.
Setting the pace.
To actually possibly go wire to wire, because they were able to get by with pretty easy fractions. So that really wasn't in his favor. Also, what else wasn't in his favor was when they came around the turn and entered the stretch, he went way wide. I mean, way wide. Probably, he ended up winning the race by a length, but he probably ran 2 extra lengths. Probably
to go around.
Yeah, to go as wide as he did, and it wasn't necessary. So I'm not real sure if that was the jockey or the horse or a little bit of both. But he didn't get boxed in, which was good, and I didn't think he would. I did mention before the race on the show that he was going to have to come over a lot because he was starting from an outside post.
Yes.
And he wanted to be close to the lead, and he was going to have to run some extra territory, run some extra ground to get over and be where he wanted to be, and he did that. So we'll see in 2 weeks. Hopefully he's healthy. Hopefully he can go for the Preakness. I have no idea what the field is going to be like, but again, the Derby field was deep. There were a lot of really, really good horses in there. So I will be pulling for him to win the Preakness if he's able to be in it. One other thing we want to wrap up real quick, and then we'll get on to new business. We want to wrap up the draft. We recorded our show while the draft was going on. We had
it was like what, the 6th and 7th round.
Yeah.
Because in the interview, Junior said, "I wish the Titans would have gotten a tight end."
It was the Cardinals.
Yeah.
He was talking about the fact that and two things and so when I finally got up Sunday after working all night Saturday night getting the show ready. When I got up Sunday and I turned on my computer, I looked. The first headline I saw on Yahoo made me laugh.
Mr. Irrelevant.
There was a thing about Mr. Irrelevant, and it was a tight end going to the Cardinals. You had talked about Mr. Irrelevant, and I can't believe I'd never even heard about it before. You talked about Mr. Irrelevant, and my son talked about he couldn't believe that the Cardinals hadn't gotten a tight end. So I got him on the phone, and I said, "Hey, guess what happened with the last pick? The Cardinals got a tight end, and we kind of got a laugh out of it." That kind of wraps up the stuff from the previous episode.
What's happening?
Was that Lumberg?
That was Lumberg.
Well, Lumberg, I'm glad you asked what's happening because we'll go over a couple of things that are holidays, observances in the month of May. One is Cinco de Mayo, which kind of depending on when you listen to this.
It was the Mexicans beat the French and something.
Man, I don't know.
I think that's what it was. They beat the French, and it was made a big holiday, and somehow it turned into a huge drinking day for us.
Well, if you know anything about it, you know more than I do about it. I just know, again, it's like, hey, it's Cinco de Mayo, let's go drink. We are celebrating Cinco de Mayo with Boomer and X sponsor, Dos Equis. And by sponsor, I mean I went into the store and paid retail for these. But it's my favorite day.
That's our secret, by the way.
Right, that's it.
That's how you get it.
That's how you get it. That's how you get sponsorship. So if there's anybody with Dos Equis listening to the show,
you just got your little...
We love your beer. So, in fact, yum. Okay, so we got Cinco de Mayo. Armed Forces Day is on the 16th. National Teachers Day is also on May 5th. Memorial Day is coming up the last Monday of the month, which is on the 25th this year. Mother's Day.
Yeah, I was about to say, did you say Mother's Day?
Not yet.
Okay.
But that's kind of the biggie because you and I are both leaving town for a month for Mother's Day.
Huh? That's news to me.
You're going. Well, you've got to attend a wedding.
Yes, my wife's in a wedding, and it's actually the day of Mother's Day.
Yes, it is.
So I guess I'm not going to get to see my mom on Mother's Day.
You get to see her some, won't you?
I don't know. It depends on how late the wedding goes.
Well, I'm taking advantage of having Friday off, and I'm going up the road about 3 hours, and I'll be spending the weekend at my sister's and brother-in-law's place. That's very close to the nursing home that my mom is in, but she's actually in pretty decent shape, even though she's in a nursing home. So anyway, I will see family this coming weekend, and I'm looking forward to that. I'm looking forward to seeing Mom for Mother's Day.
Yeah, it's always good getting to see the old family.
Yeah. May's also National Bike Month and Physical Fitness and Sports Month.
Really?
Yeah.
Huh.
Have you ridden your bike lately?
Oh, yeah.
You have? Okay.
Oh, yeah. It's, it's been perfect weather for it. It's been...
So says you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, been 70 degrees every couple of days.
Yeah, it's probably been a little more than that. But, it's early May. It's not in hellish time yet.
100 degrees with 100% humidity.
No, see, I told you about that. Because we have meteorologists listening to this show, and if I let you get away with that, they're gonna come down on me about it.
100 degrees and 100% humidity.
No, it never exists. It doesn't exist. Not on this planet. Not anywhere. So I'm not gonna let you get away with that.
So this weekend I had I went. It was kind of crazy because on our episode 3, I think.
Episode
4.
4 was the interview with Coach Dave Sterling.
Interview with the coach.
Right.
And he was promoting Family First and All Pro Dad.
Right.
And it's an organization that gets dads out in the community, and Tony Dungy's a big sponsor of it. And so we did that interview, and after we interviewed him, I went on the website and saw there was an author who wrote a book called All Pro Dad, and I got it.
And you bought the book.
Yes, I got it and I read it. And then months later, I'm sitting in church, and the pastor was saying how they're doing a men's conference, and Mark Merrill was going to be the guest speaker.
And that was the author of the book.
And I was like, man, I know that name from somewhere. And yeah, sure enough, that he was the author of the book. So I was like, man, that's crazy how he's going to be here, and I've read his book. So yeah, I went, and he talks about marriage, parenting, relationships, and leadership, and he covers all of those. I actually told him about the podcast, and he does podcast. He does a little radio thing every once in a while. I think it's like a daily, like he has a spot on a daily radio thing that he comes on and says like positive word of the day or something like that. And so anyways, I told him I'd try and send some people his way. So go to markmerrill.com. That's MarkMerrill.
And this is, again, the same organization that we spoke about with our interview that we did.
But we didn't really hit anything with Mark Merrill himself.
Right, true.
We hit All Pro Dad. And you can go to allprodad.com, and that has more of the community type stuff. Mark Merrill hits the, 5 things you should say to your wife today. So
he's
a blogger
in the specific family and dealing with your relationship with
how
your
to
wife.
How to be a good dad. I said, he does a lot of blogs on top of his book. So
right,
pretty cool. Check it out. I got him to sign my book. Pretty neat. First time I ever had an author sign my book.
Really?
Because he had a stack of books there, and he was selling them, and he was signing them as he sold them. And I walk up and I have mine already. And he's like, hey, this one looks like it's been read already. I was like, yep. Anyways, it was, like I said, go to his site. He's got some awesome blog posts on there. And maybe if y'all go on there and say Boomer and X sent you, he'll come on our show. And that would be awesome.
That would be nice.
So, yeah, go on his website and say, hey, awesome blog, Boomer and X show sent me.
Very cool. Speaking of authors, we recorded an interview with author Buzz Bernard, who is a retired meteorologist, friend of mine, somebody that I used to work with, and he has had 4 novels published.
And they're all awesome.
They're very, very good, very enjoyable page turners.
They definitely are.
Yeah, they definitely
he
are.
does. The one I've read was Plague, and it's called a thriller. And that's the genre, but he specializes in weather thrillers.
Yeah, 3 of the 4 so far are weather related.
And the one the 5th he's working on is a weather thriller.
Well, it's an
earthquake, you're right.
tsunami.
It's more of a work in progress.
Yeah. Well, earthquake and tsunami is not weather. It's
it
earth
is.
Science. It's not weather. I'm not going to let you get away with that either. But anyway, we have that conversation with Buzz that we recorded. We're going to go on to that.
So we're going to take a quick break and get to that interview.
Excellent. Buzz?
Yes.
Good morning. This is John.
Hey, John, how are you? Good to hear your voice.
Well, it's great to hear yours, too. We have a very, very special guest with us, veteran, retired meteorologist, and author of 4 published novels. His name is Buzz Bernard. His books are multiple Epic ebook award winners, and he's also been on the Kindle best-selling list multiple times as well. Previous to being a published author, Buzz had a lengthy career in the United States Air Force, and he also worked at the Weather Channel for 13 years as a meteorologist. Buzz, before we get into your books, I would like to talk a little bit about some of your Air Force experience. It says on your website, buzzbernard.com, that you flew with the Hurricane Hunter Reserves.
Yes. Back in, I forget exactly when that was. I think it was around 95 or so. I was a senior officer in the Air Force Reserve at the time, and because of that position, I had an opportunity to fly with the Air Force Reserve Hurricane Hunters, who are which is the outfit that routinely flies into hurricanes to gather data that are sent back to the National Weather Service. Data help locate the storm, give its intensity, its motion, and the same information is eventually plugged into the hurricane models, which helps us to forecast the storms. I can't say it was a particularly exciting trip. The storm we flew into was a marginal hurricane, a weak hurricane. So I've probably had bouncier trips on commercial airlines than I did on this particular fly-in through the eye of a hurricane. But what I really wanted to find out was how they went about their business, and I was able to do that, and then later transfer that information into my first novel, which was called Eyewall.
Excellent. So you did use that experience in your writing.
Oh, absolutely. At the time I flew with the Hurricane Hunters, I really hadn't begun writing novels, and I kept my notes around for a long time and was able to refer back to them when I finally did that scene in the novel.
And you made the point that this particular storm wasn't all that intense, and you'd probably had bumpier commercial flights. With just your average run-of-the-mill borderline hurricane or tropical storm, I assume it's the case that the updrafts aren't as strong as they are in maybe a garden variety afternoon thunderstorm.
I suppose that might be generally true, but in talking with some of the hurricane hunters, the real guys that fly routinely into the storms, they said that sometimes these weak storms or even tropical storms can have some significant updrafts in them. So it's not necessarily true all of the time that the weaker storms would give you a smooth ride into it. They said that some of the more violent hurricanes, the ride into the eye can be pretty smooth, and sometimes it can be absolutely terrifying. Of course, I chose terrifying for my novel.
Right.
If you read it, the trip into the eye of my fictional hurricane Janet was pretty awful.
Well, and I haven't read that one yet. I have read Plague and Supercell,
yeah.
And I do have some things to ask you specifically about those down the road. I enjoyed both of them immensely. One other thing that I wanted to specifically ask you about, spending a summer on the Arctic slope.
Actually, I did that when I was in college. Between my junior and senior year, I was asked if I wanted to go to Point Barrow, Alaska, on a research project. And I said, well, yeah, that sounds exciting. So I actually spent the summer north of the Arctic Circle at Point Barrow, Alaska. And at one point there, I actually got to fly an airdrop with the Navy out over the polar ice pack. They had an ice station. I forget what the designation of it was, but they had some researchers floating around on an ice floe up there, and the only way they could resupply them in the summertime was by, pushing stuff out the door of an airplane. flying over the ice pack. So I didn't get quite to the North Pole, but I think I got up to around 78 degrees north or something like that.
Well, I mean, that's absolutely fascinating. What is it like? What's the 24 hours of daylight like?
Well, we slept in old World War II Quonset huts that had the windows completely blacked out. So the Quonset huts were dark inside all year round, except, of course, for electric light bulbs. It was rather bizarre seeing the sun up on or above the horizon, and I'm trying to remember. I think I got there, the sun was above the horizon in June, middle June, as I recall, and then I think it was on August 3rd before I actually saw a sunset up there. So
Wow.
that was most unusual.
Now, I've heard a lot of things about mosquitoes in Alaska during the summer. Did you encounter that?
I encountered that in Fairbanks, not so much on the Arctic slope, but on my way up there, I stayed overnight in Fairbanks.
I guess the proximity to the cold water keeps that at bay in Barrow.
It's chilly up there in the summertime. As a matter of fact, we had snow flurries on the 4th of July. And again, this was a long, long time ago,
Right.
so my memory's probably a bit fuzzy. But I think the highest temperature I saw that summer was 58 degrees. Then by the time I left there, which I believe was in late August or early September, it was beginning to get a little bit snowy again. It was interesting to me there's a program on television now called Alaska State Troopers, and a lot of the stories they have come out of Fairbanks. It's interesting to me now to see that Fairbanks has, paved roads and traffic lights and everything. And I recall when I was up there, and I'm going to be dating myself now, but this was in the mid '60s.
Okay.
And there were very few paved roads in Fairbanks. I remember most of the roads as being gravel roads up there. So it was a relatively primitive town at that time. And I can see by watching the TV programs now, it's matured a lot into a nice little city up there.
You attended the University of Washington, and that's where you got your bachelor's degree in atmospheric science. You also studied creative writing at the same time. Which came first, your interest in weather or your interest in writing?
Oh, the interest in weather came first, no question about that. I've had an interest in weather ever since I was about 9 or 10 years old, maybe as early as 8 years old. But it was implanted in me very early, not from any specific event like a lot of people who became meteorologists will tell you about. But I was just interested in, I could see that red stuff in the thermometer would go up and down and tell you what temperature it was. And I wanted to find out, what caused that.
Right.
Why did we get cold? Why did we get warm? Why did we get these big storms? And I was just fascinated in that. And along the way, someplace, I found out I was a decent writer. And I think that was because of my 7th grade teacher. He was male. He came out of the Merchant Marine in World War II. And he was the basketball coach at my grade school. And he told all the 7th graders that we couldn't play basketball unless we learned English. So I made damn sure that I learned English. And I think out of that came my ability to write. I got interested in that. I signed up for the creative writing course at the University of Washington. And boy, I tell you, I felt like a fish out of water in that because I think I was the only physical science student in there. I mean, these were people who were English lit majors, and I was just completely cowed by the presence of these other people. But surprisingly enough, I found out I did fairly well in it, so that kind of encouraged me to continue my writing even after I got out of college.
Well, and I bet if you were to have a reunion with those folks, you've been among the more successful authors.
Well, that would be hard to know, but I'll certainly take what modicum of success I've had and covet it.
Well, speaking of weather and writing, in 3 of your first 4 published novels, weather was a big character, certainly a main character. But in your other one, Plague, I believe that came out in September of 2012.
That was my second novel.
Right.
Yep.
Came out in 2012. The Ebola virus and the threat of intentional release of the Ebola virus by a terrorist is the main storyline. Last year, when Ebola all of a sudden became so big in the news, and we actually had a handful of cases in the United States, what did you think about the fact that we were being faced with something that you had written about?
Well, I wished that I had the word Ebola in the title because the name of the novel is Plague, and it's not obvious what it's about. I remember having lengthy, not debates, but discussions with my publisher about what we should title the book. And I think at one time one of the ideas tossed around was Ebola. But for whatever reasons, and I'm not saying it was right or wrong, we settled on Plague. I know that we wanted to keep the title to one word, as you will notice that all of my novels have been.
Right.
One word, easy to remember if you're interested in the novel. But yeah, we finally ended up with Plague. I've done a lot of research and a lot of reading about the Ebola virus, and what triggered that was a nonfiction book I'd read. It was a New York Times bestseller, but it was called The Hot Zone by Richard Preston, which was a true story about the Ebola virus. And after reading that was one scary book. I mean, the thought of Ebola just scared me to death, and I thought for a long time, boy, this would be great fodder for a novel. And John, I actually wrote that manuscript before I wrote Eyewall. It was one of my early manuscripts. I didn't do a good job on the initial draft. I was still in the learning phase. So after I completed Eyewall, and that met with some, actually surprising success, I dredged up that novel that became Plague, that we changed the title and everything, as I said. So Plague, as I say, the initial draft to that was actually written before I did Eyewall. I would say that Plague falls more into the traditional thriller category than my other novels do, which are kind of what I would term niche thrillers, because they are about the weather and physical science and that sort of thing.
Right, certainly. Well, when we ordered your books to read for our interest and to research the show, my friend Evan read Plague, and he told me that your description of the symptoms,
the imagery was just gruesome.
It was, yes,
scary.
Gruesome. He told me it was gruesome and scary, and I was at the time reading Supercell, and of course it was about something that I known and studied and loved almost my entire life. My interest in weather goes back to a lot like yours, to the time I was 6 or 7 years old at least. So there was really the things I was reading in Supercell were interesting and filled with tension, but there was nothing that scared me. When I read your description of the symptoms of someone in the advanced stages of Ebola, it was really terrifying.
Yeah, could be a pretty gruesome way to die, and I think that's what terrified me too.
Absolutely. Did you have any concerns following the actual news story that the disease itself might break containment here in the States?
No, I really didn't, because I knew that, for one thing, if you've done some reading about Ebola, and I'm sure you have, that it is very difficult to transmit. In the book, I found a way to transmit the Ebola virus that probably would be unrealistic in terms of what we know about Ebola right now, in that it does have to be transmitted by close personal contact, i.e. through bodily fluids mainly.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Blood, saliva, that sort of thing. So it is difficult to transmit. In monkeys, it was discovered that there is a form of Ebola that's transmitted through the air. At least we think there is. Fortunately, that particular strain of Ebola is not infectious to humans, but it is to monkeys. So what I had my terrorist do in the book, the terrorist happened to be a microbiologist, was to meld the two forms of Ebola into one so that he came up with a form of Ebola that could be transmitted through the air and also deadly to humans, not only monkeys. So that's fundamentally the story in plague.
Buzz, before you retired from the Weather Channel, what year did you retire in?
I retired in 2009.
Okay, and your first novel was published in 2011. How much time were you able to spend writing before you retired?
Quite a bit, actually. I, wrote in my days off, whatever spare time I could find. I actually began writing novels in the year 2000. And it took me 10 years and 4 different manuscripts before I found a publisher for Eyewall. It's not an easy business. You have to learn a craft. Just because you're a good writer doesn't mean you're going to be a good novelist. Just because you're a good carpenter doesn't necessarily mean you can build a house. So I was writing for most of the last, 9 years I was working at the Weather Channel.
And I did want to, I'm glad you brought that up because that was something that we wanted to cover with you. The difficulty in getting published. From everything I've heard and read, that's one of the hardest things to break into for someone that's creative. I mean, it's easier to get a painting in a gallery. There are a lot of things easier than getting published. And what were some of the early setbacks? And if you could just go through some of that for us.
I decided that I wanted to be commercially published. That is, I wanted to have somebody pay me. I wanted to have a publisher pay me for my novels rather than pay somebody to publish my novel.
Okay.
If you go that route, what we call self-publishing, and it's a legitimate way to go in certain cases. I'm not knocking it. In most cases, when you go the self-publishing route, you've basically got yourself a book, and that's about it.
Mm-hmm.
You aren't necessarily going to have sales. So the key to getting published traditionally or commercially is to find yourself an agent. The agents are gatekeepers to the mainstream publishers. That's probably the steepest mountain to climb, is to find an agent, because they're just absolutely overwhelmed with submissions from people who want to be published. So I probably had, what you do first is you send out something called a query letter, which is a one-page letter basically describing you and your book. Some agents get hundreds of these query letters a week, and the rejection rate is awesome. I probably got 200 rejections from agents over the 8 or 10 years I was trying to find an agent.
200 rejections.
Yeah. And if you talk to authors, you'll find that's not unusual. It's an effort that's not for the faint of heart or easily discouraged. Let me tell you that.
So in some ways, it's a war of attrition.
It really is. I had one writer tell me, accomplished writer, said, basically you've got to be in the top 1 or 2% of all writers to get commercially published. I'm not with a big publisher, but neither is my publisher. I don't think it's any longer considered a small press. It's sort of a mid-major, I've heard it referred to. But for me, it's a very comfortable place to be.
Well, that's good. So I assume once you punch through with an agent and then you get published, I assume getting number 2 published is much, much easier than getting number 1 published.
Well, that's what I found. Sometimes the number 2 book, they tell me, is the key, because sometimes you do very well with the number 1 book and not so well with the number 2 book, and then that makes getting number 3 published extremely difficult. I sort of experienced that with eye wall and plague, because eye wall became a #1 bestseller on Kindle. Plague never quite achieved that, and I found out later why. But I think if I'd been with a big name publishing house, New York publishing house at that time, the fact that Plague didn't do quite as well, didn't do nearly so well as eye wall, might have shut me out on my third novel, Supercell. Fortunately, like I say, I was with a relatively small publisher, and they were willing to, let's go ahead and do Supercell too, and see what happens. And Supercell did pretty well.
You touched on there was an issue with Plague. What was that?
Well, the issue with Plague is that, as I said earlier, it was a traditional thriller, and what I've come to discover is that people who read thrillers as opposed to other genres such as romance or mystery and suspense are very loyal, are very brand loyal to the big name authors, and are reluctant to give unknown authors such as myself a chance in the market. I'm not sure why that is. It just is. And I guess I'm kind of the same way as a reader of thrillers, which is probably the genre I read most. I tend to go back to the same authors over and over again. So it's just a fact of the market and how your particular genre is welcomed into it. I probably would have been better off just sticking with my niche market of doing the weather thrillers. But I didn't know that at the time and went for the traditional thriller. And I think that was part of the reason it didn't do all that well.
I see. So you think weather actually helped you break in because it was serving a little bit maybe of an underserved readership?
Yeah, exactly. I found an area where I fit in nicely with eye wall and Supercell, and then Blizzard. The novel I'm working on now probably is not going to be weather-related, but it's still in that niche of physical science or geoscience thrillers. It's going to be about earthquakes and tsunamis that threaten the Pacific Northwest. So I'm staying in the same general genre and not trying to make that jump again to the traditional thriller area.
Well, Buzz, let's take a real quick break, and when we come back, I want to talk to you about just the nuts and bolts of writing.
Okay.
All right, we'll be right back.
All right, welcome back, everybody. So, like John said before, we're going to get into some nuts and bolts of Buzz's writing and some inspirations for your ideas. How do those usually come to you?
That's always a hard question to answer. The answer for eye wall is relatively easy, because I did have a genuine seed of inspiration for that from the fact that during, I'm trying to think of the name of the hurricane that came into Charleston.
Hugo?
Hmm?
Was it Hugo?
Hugo, yes, Hugo. Thank you, John.
Yes.
See what happens when you get old? the names just don't come to you. Yes, Hurricane Hugo. In Hurricane Hugo, there actually was a NOAA hurricane hunter that flew into the storm, lost an engine, and lost much of its avionics and couldn't fly out of the eye. It kind of got stuck in the eye or lost in the eye. Ironically, it was an Air Force hurricane hunter that had to fly into the eye, find the NOAA hurricane hunter, and then lead it out through the eye wall of the storm. And I got to thinking after I heard that story, now, what would happen if a plane flew in there and got so badly damaged going into the eye, through the eye wall, that it would be unable to fly out? So that was kind of the seed of the story for eye wall. And then I began to think about, well, I just can't that can't be the only thread in the story about a plane that gets stuck in the eye of a hurricane. There's got to be other subplots going on. So in my mind, I just start thinking about, well, what else could go on there? And I gradually came up with several other subplots and begin rolling those over and over in my mind. And after I do that for several months, then I sit down and made some notes, kind of a fuzzy outline for the story, and that was the basis of the inspiration for Eyewall. That was how Eyewall got started.
Well, speaking of subplots, I noticed in both of your books that I've read so far, very early on there's a meeting between a male and a female, and they don't know each other going into the story, but they develop a romantic and or a sexual tension very early.
The majority of readers of novels are women, and so I always try to have some romantic element in the novels that I write. Some romantic tension, some sexual tension, and that always turns out to be one of the subplots of my novels.
So I would find that in your other books as well.
You will find that in Blizzard, certainly, and in, well, you said you haven't gotten to Eyewall yet, but it's certainly there in Eyewall, too.
I see.
And speaking of your characters, do you usually pull traits from people you know, or you just, how do you come up with your characters?
No, my characters are just largely imaginary. If anything, I may pull a particular trait from a particular individual, but all of the characters in my novels are perhaps composites of people I've met. I've never taken a character right out of real life and given him or her a fictional name and then stuck him or her into a novel. They're made up. I try to keep the names relatively simple so people will remember them. You know, if you read a novel, for instance, with Russian characters or characters from the Middle East, you can sometimes get wound around the axle trying to remember who they are with their names. So I don't spend a lot of time with the names. I just try to keep them relatively simple. You know, usually they're names that appeal to me for whatever reasons. So that's where the naming action comes from.
In the process of writing, have you ever maybe introduced a character or a subplot and then yourself lost interest in it, so took it out of your manuscript?
No, often the opposite will happen. What happened was I had one of the minor characters kind of took over the action, and I hadn't meant for that to happen. So for that reason, I had to abandon that particular tact on the novel. It happens frequently that I'll introduce a minor character into the novel, and that particular character will end up having a much larger role in the novel than I ever intended him or her to. And that's kind of the fun of writing, to see where the characters will take you. Like I said, I'll make a broad outline when I begin just so I know where I'm going, kind of a strategic roadmap or strategic plan, if you will. I know I want to get from A to B to C to D, but I don't know how I'm going to do that.
Right.
And that's when I sit down to write. I don't outline chapter by chapter. I just start writing the chapter, and I bring in the characters, and it sounds kind of funny to a non-writer, I know, but the character will kind of direct you and tell you where he or she wants to go and which direction the story is going to go.
So would you say you're more of a fly-by-the-seat-of-your-pants type of writer, or you like to block everything out first and follow that outline?
Yeah, I do like to work from an outline. And matter of fact, I just sat in on an internet panel with the International Thriller Writers Organization, and we discussed about, are you seat of the pants? Do you outline? And if you outline, how detailed are you? Some writers are very detailed outliners. I mean, I've talked to authors who may have a several-page outline for each chapter. Wow. And other authors say, if I outline it, it's steals my creativity and spontaneity. So I just sit down and start writing, seat of the pants kind of approach. And there is no right or wrong way of doing this. It's just whatever works for you. And whatever works for me is to have sort of a loose outline so I don't lose myself in the story, which actually happened once. I started writing a novel, got about 100 page into it, and realized I didn't know where the heck I was going. So I had to abandon the whole project at that point. And that taught me that, you better sit down and at least have a 1 or 2 page outline. So that's what I do. I have a loose outline, then I draft little biographies for my characters so I know a little bit about them when I start to write, and then I'll just let the characters carry me along. I mean, it's me writing the dialogue, but I never pre-plan the dialogue. I just let it free flow.
And that's interesting. So you have actually just discarded an entire project. Yep.
I mean, it was, I just got lost in it. I realized I didn't have a great story. I didn't know how I was going to get out of it. And I said, there's no use trying to salvage this.
Right.
It's just not going to work. I tossed it away.
In reading in your books after the actual story is over and after the epilogue, you see that you mentioned research that you do, and this may be kind of hard to answer because it's a very general question, but I'll ask: what's the amount of time spent researching versus the amount of time writing? I mean, is it a 50-50? Is it?
Well, again, it depends on my subject. I'm familiar with blizzards and severe weather and hurricanes, so there's a relatively minimal amount of research I have to do for those. I make sure that I, sort of commune with the experts when I'm writing those, so I don't step on my poncho and make a big mistake in what I'm describing. So, but the raw research itself is minimal in those cases where I'm writing about weather. Obviously, when I'm writing about the Ebola virus, that took a great deal of research. And maybe I spent, 30% of my time on research and 70% of my time writing for plague. And it's sort of the same boat now that I'm dealing with earthquakes and tsunamis. I have to learn about plate tectonics and all of that sort of thing, which interests me. So I don't find the research onerous at all. I find it quite interesting as a matter of fact. But I did have to read several books. I bought some DVDs about the problems that the Pacific Northwest faces in terms of earthquakes and tsunamis. And I've also drafted a couple of professors from the University of Washington to help me out to again make sure I get the science right in what I'm writing about. So there's substantially more research involved in current novel I'm writing than there have been in the 3 weather-related novels.
I see. And it takes the form of not only reading books, but certainly interviewing people.
Interviewing people. Of course, these days there's so much material available on the Internet. So I spend a lot of time getting stuff off the Internet. But again, I want to make sure that it's factual material. So usually I'll want to have at least 2 different sources for material I pull off Internet. And then if I'm uncertain or don't completely understand something, that's when I'll contact one of the professors I've come to know at the University of Washington. And then there's also a gentleman who works on the Oregon coast who's I think he's called a coastal hazards specialist, deals with storms and tides and also the threat of tsunamis out there, and he's been a big help to me. So I do seek out the expertise of people who know a lot more about the stuff I'm writing about than I do myself.
And have you ever traveled somewhere just to get information or research maybe about a location? Any other specific thing that you could only really glean from actually being there?
Yeah, I have a lot of friends who are storm chasers, and I imagine you do too. But I'd never really been on a storm chase or tornado chase on the Great Plains. So I did sign up to go on a tornado chase on the Great Plains before I wrote Supercell, because I needed to gain that experience of not only, being familiar with the region, the topography, the terrain, the vegetation, but also I wanted to find out how storm chasers actually go about their business. So I did do that.
I'm sure ideas come to you all the time. Do you take a notepad, a tape recorder? How do you facilitate being able to get something down when you're not in a place where you can write?
Yeah, that's a good question, because I think a writer never stops writing. I may be watching a TV program or sitting in church or something and maybe not paying attention to what I should be paying attention to. I'm thinking about a scene from my novel or how some of the characters are going to react. I probably should carry a recorder or iPhone or something with me to get down ideas that fly into my head, but I don't. I usually can remember them long enough to find a pad of paper someplace to scribble a few notes on. But yeah, that's a good point. I know that there are authors who carry around notepads, or they'll put a little memo into their iPhone or iPad or something. So if something does come to them on the fly, they're able to capture it.
A term that we hear is writer's block. Do you get it, and how do you punch through it?
You know what? I've never really experienced that. I've experienced some cases where I kind of get, what am I going to do next? But I've never been at a loss for words, and I've heard that for people who do experience that, and I guess it probably is a real thing, that the best way to blast through it is just sit down and start writing, whether you've got a good idea or good direction or not. But I personally, no, I've never come up against writer's block.
I'll tell you what, let's take a real quick break, and we will come back and we will finish up our conversation with author Buzz Bernard.
And we're back. Buzz, I saw on your website you're a part of numerous writers clubs. What have you just always been a part of those, and then because you're interested in writing, and that helped you get into doing your novel, or is that like more for networking? Or
the answer is yes, both things. I found that I couldn't just pick up a book and learn how to become a novelist. I actually tried that at the beginning. Actually, the first time I tried, I just sat down and started writing. I didn't know what in the heck I was doing, and it certainly showed in the production that I turned out. So the next time I tried it, I did buy a book or two about how to write a novel, and I started reading those. And I'm kind of a person who has to learn by hands-on and doing it. Kind of need somebody looking at the stuff I'm doing and saying, don't do that, do this, or you made a mistake here. So to me, belonging to writers groups is valuable, because you find people there who can really instruct well, but at the same time you're also making contacts and networking. So even though I'm a published author now, I continue to be active in writers groups. I belong to a little informal critique group that meets once a month, and fortunately it's a group of people that aren't afraid to point out to me, even though I'm a published author, that that phrase wasn't too good, or you lost me in that paragraph. So I'm constantly learning and getting critiqued and learning to deal with it is part of the business of being a writer.
So you do get a lot of, part of your process then is giving samples, maybe a chapter or two to someone and getting a lot of feedback.
Yes, and I usually take bits and pieces of the novel I'm writing into my critique group once a month, which probably isn't the best way of getting a novel critiqued in bits and pieces, but it's the only way it works when you're with a small group and you're limited for time. But when I do finish my first drafts of my novels, I have maybe 4 or 5 people that I've learned to trust over the years that I know will be honest with me and not just pat me on the back and say, "Oh, this is great stuff, Buzz." It's not what I'm looking for. I'm looking for ways to make it better.
Yeah.
So I'll send my first draft of the initial draft of the manuscript off to them and get feedback, and then from that I'll start doing some rewriting based on the feedback I get from these people.
You definitely don't want to surround yourself with yes men.
No, you don't. I mean, it's nice to get an accolade and attaboy and that sort of thing, but that's not making you a better writer, and most people, including myself, aren't that good that they are going to get attaboys all over the place and have it be real. So I welcome the critique and criticism. As I say, you just have to learn to deal with that. Some people can't. Some people don't like their work to be critiqued or criticized, and those are probably the people who are never going to become successful writers.
I was about to say, since you went through a roughly 200 rejections before you were able to get published, I would say being thin-skinned is probably not a trait that would serve you well in this business.
No, even after you're published, you're going to be a public figure at that point. Your works are going to be reviewed and critiqued on places like Amazon and BarnesandNoble.com, and there's a site called Goodreads where people can post comments about your book. You're going to get some very negative comments about your book, and I don't care who you are, if you're Stephen King or Daniel Silva or any of the big name writers, everybody's going to get dinged at some point or another.
Right.
And you just have to learn that again, it's part of the business.
Certainly. I wanted to ask you a question, if you intend to do any sequels to books, and the reason I asked that is because there was a paragraph in your epilogue in Plague that hinted at the possibility of that maybe things weren't entirely settled.
I didn't do that because I planned to write a sequel, and at this point I don't. I think the book would have to be a lot more successful than it has been to warrant a sequel. I just wanted to leave that possibility hanging out there of the way I ended that particular book. It wasn't all wrapped up in and they all lived happily ever after.
Yeah. No, it wasn't.
I wanted to make it a little different. So, yeah, as far as doing sequels, no, I don't have that in mind. That's not to say I would never do one. I just don't know at this point. But it's nothing that I've thought about or planned.
I see. Well, I was just a little intrigued by, and you obviously know the paragraph I'm talking about.
Yeah. I do.
So it definitely got me thinking.
Yeah, left you on a little bit of a cliffhanger.
Yeah.
Do you have any upcoming public appearances or promotional activities that you would like to mention?
I will be appearing at the Decatur, or I guess it's called the Atlanta Journal-Constitution Decatur Book Festival over Labor Day weekend, which is, I think it's considered the largest independent book festival in the country. There'll be thousands of people there. I'll be appearing at that. In June, although it's not open to the public, I'll be at the Southeastern Writers Association workshop on St. Simon's Island. We have a little bookstore at the workshop where actually you could pop in if you wanted to and meet some of the authors and get signed books and that sort of thing. And then I think near the end of September, St. Simon's, the St. Simon's Island Literary Guild. I may not have that name entirely right, but they do have a one-day book festival there that I went to last year, and it was very good, quite successful, and I plan on going to that again this year. I think that is probably the last Sunday in September, if memory serves. So I do have those, and you bring up the fact of public appearances and promos and that sort of thing. What I've come to find out is now that I have met with a modicum of success in my writing, I've got 4 novels out, working on a 5th, is that the business of writing takes up almost as much time as the writing itself. Because I am on the board of directors for the Southeastern Writers, I do get questions from readers who contact me through my website or send me an email. I am requested to do public appearances. So, and that's all part of the business. It's necessary, and I enjoy it. But you know what? I'd rather be writing. I think most authors would rather be writing, but that's just not the reality of the business. We just can't sit and hand off a manuscript and hope it does well. We've got to be out there actively promoting it and promoting ourselves, which is something that doesn't come naturally to many writers because we tend to be sort of inhibited. We'd rather just, as I say, sit in our chairs and write all day, not have to deal with public appearances and speaking and all that sort of thing. But if you are going to be successful, you have to be able to do that. So again, that's what I'm learning to do over the past 10 years or so since I have been published.
And I would assume that it is becoming a little more natural to you.
Oh, I think so. I mean, I've never had a particular fear of public speaking or anything, and I have done radio and television in the past. So it's just kind of, dredging up some of those old experiences and talents again to be able to, come on the air and talk to you two folks and spread the word about me and my books, and I really appreciate having the opportunity to be able to do that. It's kind of fun.
Well, and we certainly appreciate you joining us. We are in the formative stages of our little show here, so having you on has definitely been an honor for us. And
yes,
I want to congratulate you on the success in your 3rd career. And
thank you, John.
And continued success. Your website is buzzbernard.com.
Right.
And there's information about you, about your books, how to purchase your books, and so we would like for our listeners to go and check it out. I can certainly tell you from reading 2 of his novels that very entertaining and suspenseful, and I enjoyed them, and I look forward to reading the others as well. Buzz, I think that wraps it up for us. And again, just thanks so much for joining us.
Okay, my pleasure. It's actually been quite fun.
To our listeners, we will be back in just a minute to wrap up. Okay, that was Buzz Bernard on the interview. That was Howard LaPointe on the music right there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We've used this stuff a couple times.
Yeah, we have. We've used this stuff a bit. When we first started this project, you kind of sent out a call for music.
Just any music for break time.
And he sent stuff in, and we do use it from time to time. And thank you, Howard LaPointe,
and he's
for
a
that.
fan. He follows our stuff.
He does.
Yeah, so. Hey, Howard.
Hey, Howard. Thanks for the music. Another acknowledgement. Thank you, Juan Broussard, as show contributor.
Oh, yeah, Juan.
I also want to mention that a permanent part of the team, now the Boomerang X team, is Janice Nelson. She has a background in public relations. She's going to be, in her spare time of her own goodwill.
Yeah, she's paid her a lot.
She's going to be improving our
online presence.
Online presence,
Social
social
media,
media
yeah.
presence. Yeah, she's going to be working with
And
that.
she's great. I mean, she does it. She loves it the way you love weather. You know,
Yes, she does.
She just loves
doing it.
And
Right.
So we're just giving her more fun to have, really.
So, yeah, we definitely appreciate her efforts along those lines.
So, yeah, we just got that new Twitter handle, and that's at @boomerandxshow. And we're still on Facebook. You just go search The Boomer and X Show and go on there and comment and give us some feedback.
And you can drop us an email at theboomerandxshow@yahoo.com. That's going to do it for this episode. We thank you for listening. We'll see you next time. Have a great week.
See ya. That's all, folks.